Hey everybody, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 67. It's the beginning of a great adventure. We shall see how many parts this will take. It should be 3 parts, but it might be 2. We will find out together. But in this series of exciting videos, because 2 of something can be a series, right? We will be discussing the White Stripes in 2005, specifically their masterpiece. Yes, their masterpiece. 2005's Get Behind Me, Satan, which was their 5th album. And some would say their best, because I am some. Yes, I contain multitudes, if you did not already know. I also would like to draw attention to the button. I'm a great one for wearing buttons, and this is a homemade one from the early 2000s. I've gotten a button maker that I made this. Meg White is my hero. So I wore this. I started wearing this when I went to go see the White Stripes live, because one of the weird things of the fandom was people would wear buttons of them. And so you would constantly see people festooned with buttons, or as they say in England, in the UK, badges. The organizing concept of this, of these videos, 2 or 3, we shall find out, is basically the White Stripes in 2005. However, the story is going to be told out of order. We're going to be skipping around a lot, but I think that's okay, and I think you can handle that. The second or third video will be the actual discussion, what we term around here album talk, will pop up in whatever the final video shall be. And I will also be talking about the singles and the B-sides and all the other different releases. And I will be touching upon the demo recordings, some of the live stuff, specifically in this vault package, the Get Behind Me, Satan 20 release, which came out not that long ago. There are going to be 2 tales told here. And one is, and they shall eventually meet. The streams shall eventually combine. Foreshadowing. And one of which is my fandom with the White Stripes. The other is sort of what the state of the White Stripes, where they were at in 2005. Going deep, providing context like only Rich Talks Records does. Now, I happen to, and I think I've referenced this before, I happen to clock the White Stripes relatively early. Purely kind of by dumb happenstance. I was going to a lot of shows, a lot of underground shows. I was really into, I guess, what you would nominally call the rock and roll revival, long before it codified as the garage rock thing that was this sort of retro-minded garage rock thing that was somehow spearheaded by the Strokes. I can tell you, I didn't know anything about the Strokes in the late 90s. There was some website, and I don't remember what it was. There were a couple different websites at the time sort of dedicated to new, great, cool rock and roll bands. And one of them had a Real Player pop up, and it had You're Pretty Good Looking for a Girl. And I was in that 30 seconds, I was completely won over and completely taken. And I went and I bought the album the next day. And this is what I got. It was, believe it or not, I bought this at a Borders. And this is the second album of Day Still. This is the original Sympathy for the Record Industry. There it is. I don't know if you can see that, but there it is. And Borders, at the time, there was sort of a, I don't know, indie hipster contingent that worked at Borders, man. And you could find some pretty cool stuff there back then. It is hard to believe, but the Borders that I used to go to was pretty damn good. So I got this, and then I think I went back like a day later or 2 days later. I was shocked to find out that they actually had another album, a debut album, and I went and picked that up right away, and I was totally blown away by this. Saw the White Stripes a couple months later. It would have been at the Empty Bottle, and I'm just going to tell a bunch of White Stripes stories. We'll see how much of this I keep in the video. I might keep all of them. That's right. So we'll find, again, we shall find out together. But I saw them at the Empty Bottle. I was talking to this group of these sort of cool punk rock girls, and there was that sort of indie, like, where you're being tested, like, are you cool enough? Are you good enough? Are you pure enough thing? And all of a sudden, one of them pointed at the stage, and they said, "Hey, what do you think of that titty action?" And I was like, what? And there was Meg. So the first time I ever saw the White Stripes, I saw Meg. And Meg was laying on the stage, just laying down. And there was a cat that used to wander around in the Empty Bottle. And she was just petting this cat. And I just remember being like very struck. And I want to say she was in all white. And it was just like, whoa, that's the girl from, like, that's that girl. Whoa, what, huh? And it was very, like, befuddling to me to, like, there she was, you know. And then Jack comes out, and I had never seen, you know, the guitar that's all busted up. It looked like cardboard was on the front of, fashioned to the front of it. And I just, like, I was completely, totally knocked out by the White Stripes. It was kind of like this moment of, like, I think I just saw the greatest band on the planet. I mean, it was this, wow, they were even better than I thought they were, than I thought they would be. And there were some really great bands around at that time. I mean, the early version of The Gossip, when Kathy Mendonca was the drummer, the Dirt Bombs. I mean, there were a lot of really, really great bands to go see. And somehow the White Stripes were just somehow up another level. A couple of years later, when people would say how the garage rock thing had been astroturfed, or it was fake, or they would call out, or call, you know, they would question the legitimacy of the White Stripes. The thing is, I watched that crowd grow every single time they played. It was totally word of mouth. They really weren't getting written up. The only place where they were getting written up was on, like, these very, very, very tiny little, like, GeoCities, Angel Fire websites. I mean, the press hadn't picked up on them. And I legitimately watched their crowd grow. One show they played at the Empty Bottle, they ran through near their whole repertoire, and they just sort of ran out of songs. I remember I want to say they did a cover, they came out and did a cover, attempted to do a cover of Robert Johnson's 3220 Blues, I think. They just didn't have any others. And like, the people just would not let them leave. No one wanted to leave the room. That was the sort of thing that they provoked in people, and the sort of thing that they provoked in me. There's also a show that's a full show that's out there from the Empty Bottle. I want to say summer of 2001, and it was when White Blood Cells came out. This incredible album. And I actually got this because I was on, maybe not a first name basis, I was on a facial recognition, perhaps, basis with some of their crew, some of the people around them. And I don't think I ever talked to Ben Blackwell. I had a friend who was sort of email buddies with Ben Blackwell, but I don't think I ever directly spoke to him. I was, like, around him, like he'd be walking past or something. I mean, that was one of the things initially with the White Stripes. Like, there was Meg petting the cat. There was, I remember seeing Jack, not in White Stripes clothes, like, greeting family members who, like, it was like a little kid and, like, an aunt or something, you know, like, it looked to be like an aunt or something. He was, like, hugging them hello. So I was on kind of oh, hey, you're that guy. Because I used to go see them all the time. I mean, I was just completely taken with them, and they were in Detroit. So they still had jobs at that point. So they would come down and play, like, different parts of the Midwest, like, when they could get, like, a long weekend off from work. It was that sort of thing. So, but I actually got this before it was available commercially. I was I was one of the first. They had copies set aside for sort of the diehards or people who were demanding it. So I actually heard these songs before the album came out, and was like, I already knew a good chunk of the White Blood Cell songs, and was like, this is going to be one of the greatest rock and roll albums ever made. And I remember bringing it home, and I listened to it straight away after getting home from the show. And so it was on Sympathy for the Record Industry. But this is, like I said, this is technically, I got this, whatever the release date is, I got it like a week or two before it came out. And then this was later then reissued on V2 when the White Stripes became a global sensation. It became a phenomenon. And it happened very quickly. I mean, it was kind of almost on a month-by-month basis. I should throw up the photo. I also saw the White Stripes once play for free in a park. So the first time I ever spoke to Jack, I actually saw the White Stripes play in this park. And Rich find the photos and throw it up, and you can quite clearly see the back of my head in a couple of the photos. And I remember before the show, Jack walking around, and he had this, sometimes you'll see it like in old photos, he had this jacket with this Coca-Cola patch, this Coca-Cola logo patch on the back. And I remember seeing a pair of red pants in the distance and then the Coca-Cola patch. And I was like, holy shit, he's just like walking around smoking a cigarette. And that was the first time I ever spoke to Jack. And he couldn't have been cooler, and he couldn't have been nicer. He was really, really, really cool. And I talked to him for like, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes. And we just talked about like all sorts of music stuff. And that show was pretty amazing. I mean, it was outdoors in a park. It was pretty cold outside. And one of the things I remember is Jack's guitar strap broke mid-song. And it was, it's the red and white guitar. Is it Airline? I forget the name of the type of guitar it is. But it thudded against the ground. It was like a dong, as electric guitars will do. And I'll never forget, he swung it up with his left hand and just shoved it into his armpit and played like 2 songs with the guitar just balancing in his armpit and didn't miss a note. And I remember there were a lot of things like that early on, seeing the White Stripes, of just like kind of being amazed by them. The night I got this record, they played a few nights right around the time that this was coming out, and they actually had some copies for fans. I mean, I paid for it. It wasn't like it was given to me. But they were also like, hey, like, we know you want one, which was really, really cool. So there's a whole show from one of those nights, and I'm definitely in the crowd somewhere on the bottom right. I had located myself, like, because it went up on the internet not that long after, and I had located myself at some point, and I tried rewatching it maybe 3, 4, or 5, whatever, years ago, and I could not find myself in there. But probably the coolest one, and probably the coolest night, and the night that I think would be the most fun to talk about, was went to go see them in St. Louis, and they were already starting to take off at this point. They were already starting to become a thing. The crowd was a lot denser. It was a lot less strictly indie people or punk rock people, and slightly, for lack of a better way of putting it, slightly more normal people. Because, I mean, it was a pretty niche crowd. I mean, you had a lot of people, dressed up like they were buddies with the MC5 and 69, sort of, there was a lot of, time spent on, people getting their look down. And so there all of a sudden was a little bit less of that. But that night, it was the Greenhorns who played. I forget who else. And I somehow, the stage, will be a little hard to explain. So, there's like the main stage that everybody stands in front of and looks at, right? Then there was like a support beam, and there was this other side of the stage where you could just sort of stand there and like sort of somewhat L-shaped, and you could effectively look at the band in profile. And then past that was where the bathrooms and then the dressing room was, or the green room or whatever. And somehow I got myself positioned directly against the stage. And I mean, this was a small place anyway. So they were like, I don't know, 10 feet away from me, if that. I mean, they were right there. And it was maybe the single best show I ever saw them do. I mean, they were absolutely, utterly incandescent. And that night I talked to Jack for maybe like a half hour. I mean, he was really cool. We talked about the Mississippi Sheiks. One of the things he did the few times that I talked, I spoke to him a couple other brief times at shows in Chicago, but the show at the park and the one in St. Louis were the times I talked to him the longest. And I'll never forget, it was interesting because he towered above me. I mean, I'm pretty short and he's very tall. And I'll never forget, it was interesting. He kept shaking my hand. He kept reaching down and shaking my hand. And then he asked like 3 or 4 times what my name was. I thought that was so interesting. He kept asking what my name was. So, but he couldn't have been cooler. And then that night, so now I'm going to introduce an element of this video and the next one. The White Stripes Box of Mystery, which I purchased this was at the merch table on the Get Behind Me Satan tour. So we shall reach into the box of mystery. What will we pull out? Well, on this night in St. Louis, they had at the merch table, they had repressings, and my friend who was email buddies with Ben Blackwell had been given the heads up that they were repressing the Big Three Killed My Baby single and Lafayette Blues, which was the one that I really, really, really wanted because all I had was this horrible, horrible sounding MP3. So these were very big deals, and I couldn't have bought these fast enough. Lafayette Blues, the B-side, of course, is Sugar Never Tasted So Good. This might be the single greatest thing that the White Stripes ever did. I don't know that this might be one of the greatest singles ever recorded. To me, this is up there with anything, any of the greats. I put this up against any Motown or Phil Spector or Beatles or whatever. I love this. I love this single so much. I love Lafayette Blues. It's one of the most perfect pure rock and roll songs ever written and recorded. And then this. I mean, the Big Three Killed My Baby. Come on. And Red Bowling Ball Ruth, an underrated, largely probably unknown B-side that is amazing. The White Stripes were an incredible, incredible singles band in that time. Absolutely. Like, the albums are great and everything, but they could knock singles out like nobody's business. So, but that night, so I got those. So the show was amazing. I talked to Jack. That was amazing. I got the singles. I chit-chatted with the one roadie guy who was really lovely. And then there she was. There she was at the bar, sitting alone at the bar. And people were already like dispersing, like people were leaving. And there's Meg. And I remember my friend and I were like, whoa, there's Meg. She's just sitting like, holy Christ, like there she is. And I remember just saying, fuck it, we're going over. Like, I was just that kind of night, I had a hot hand, I was like, we're going over. We're going in, damn it. And I remember being very like, Meg, I'm really sorry to bother you. And she turned around and she was smiling. So I thought, and I was like, I'm really sorry to bother you, but we drove all the way down from Chicago and you guys were absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for such an amazing show. And as soon as I said we drove all the way down from Chicago, she's like, oh no, we were really bad tonight. I'm so sorry. And she starts apologizing that we drove that long to come see them. And I was like, no. And like my friend, we're like, no, it was awesome. We love it. We love you. Like, no, this was amazing. Thank you. Like, and she was like, oh, and she just sort of smiled because, like the scene in the documentary, the Northern Lights, like documentary, like that's no act. She really was like that. And we're like, no, and we didn't want to bug her anymore. She couldn't have been nicer, but she was very shy, very soft-spoken. She was literally sitting alone at the bar. But we were like, we got to talk to Meg, and, I hope she got that we enjoyed the show, And I'll never forget, we got outside, and this is where it gets a little weird, and it was raining. It was just insane downpour. And we found a hotel room, and we each got rooms because it was like a converted dorm. It was really weird. It was like cinder block walls, and the rooms were very tiny, and it was just like an analog television. It was just, I don't even know that it had a remote control. It was just like an old school television. And it felt very White Stripes. And I turned it on, and what was the movie playing? But that weird 1977 Muhammad Ali biopic where he plays himself and Ernest Borgnine plays Angelo Dundee. It was baffling. I had never seen that movie before, and it's, objectively not very good. And I just sat there, and fun fact, did you know that the song that Whitney Houston made famous, The Greatest Love of All, was written for that movie? That's the theme. I forget, I think George Benson does it? I forget who does it. But it was, and I just remember like looking at my singles, being like, wow, I get to go home and play these, and watching the Muhammad Ali biopic, like watching a man in his late 30s portray himself in his early 20s, but not doing anything different and no makeup. It was very, very weird. And then we drove home the next day, and then 9/11 was like a day or two later. It was very weird. It was very, very weird. But anyway, that was the peak of seeing the White Stripes live. Or was it? We shall now venture yet again into the White Stripes box of mystery. What secrets does it contain? So one of the things about the White Stripes is it contains, in the box of mystery is a very mysterious, very badly done CDR bootleg. The White Stripes were the kingpins of this fleeting, now ethereal, so ethereal as if to have perhaps never even existed. You didn't get like big bootleg packages like you would with Bob Dylan or the Rolling Stones or something. These were all home-burned CDRs that fans would make artwork for, and you would just do trades. So I wound up getting a ton of these. And so a lot of these early B-sides and different, and like Jack's stuff with like the upholsterers, and I had the Go album, which I had bought purely unrelated to Jack White before I knew who Jack White was. It just looked cool and it was on Sub Pop, so I decided to check it out. And I don't know what had happened to my copy of it. I don't know if I lost it or got heisted, or I don't think I would have given it away because I like the album. But you would get these, you would get the obscure like Two Star Tabernacle kind of stuff on CDR bootlegs like this. And again, I had tons of these for the White Stripes. Now, the White Stripes, of course, then became extremely famous. And what was weird was they got kind of famous off of Fell in Love with a Girl, but then things went, cuckoo bananas, and they became fully a mainstream band with their fourth album, Elephant. This is the copy that I bought at entirely different Borders on the day that it came out. And I was really excited to hear it. It was like, this was their time. Fantastic, And I don't know that I think I had somehow avoided hearing Seven Nation Army somehow. And I listened to this on my car stereo on the way home. And then I listened to it again that night, just on my headphones in my bedroom. And I had read some of the reviews already. And I remember one review compared it to like, what was it? They compared it to Pet Sounds and Prince's 1999. And people were really, really going, again, cuckoo bananas for this album. And I loved the first two albums, okay? I loved them. But this totally was the goods as far as I was concerned. I thought White Blood Cells, like, it just was like the peak of rock and roll mountain. The peak of the rock and roll mountain, certainly of the time. And then with Elephant, outside of a handful of songs, I didn't really enjoy it. I thought a lot of it was just sort of honestly half-cocked. And I have come to appreciate the album much more over the years, but it was very weird. To me, it sort of felt like, and I think that the White Stripes have been sort of, and the perception of them has sort of been askew ever since to me, really, out in the greater world, which is another one of the reasons I wanted to do this video, or these videos, is because, to me, they became super famous off of this record, but this is a transition album. It would be like if the Beatles got super famous off of Beatles for Sale or something. It was just, there's some great stuff on here. This album, at its best, has a really interesting atmosphere that I very much appreciate, but it is, I hate to put it this way, it's a little like Neil Young's Harvest, where, and I guess maybe that's the only sort of other album that you could compare it to, where it's like a by the books rundown of what somebody would think a Neil Young album is from Harvest, without delving into Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, After the Gold Rush, or Tonight's the Night, or Zuma, or On the Beach, or something like that. And this was just sort of like to me, it just sort of felt like a one-stop shop of what people would perceive to be what the White Stripes were about. And I thought that again, it paled compared to this, and honestly, and to Distill as well. Eventually, though, I did come round a little bit more to this album. I do, of course, have it on vinyl. There it is. I do like it much better on vinyl. I always thought that the sequencing on CD of the first album is a little weird. Again, the vinyl sequencing of the first album blows the CD sequencing out of the water. This works better on vinyl, but I would also say that I think that this, I mean, it's technically a double album, kind of double album in name only, but, or in, well, you get what I'm saying. It's not a double album like how Blonde on Blonde is a double album, or Exile on Main Street or something. But I think that there is, honestly, I would cut this in half, and it would be far, far stronger to me. Maybe not half. Maybe that's a little harsh, but you could cut a quarter out of it. That's for sure. And the things that were the weakest on here, again, it's kind of like Neil Young's Harvest. It's surprising that what is considered like this prime definitive album, if you're really into them, is kind of and it's still, you see it written about as this defining statement. I never thought it was. And honestly, I just wish that they had spent a little bit more time on it. I wish they'd spent another couple months I wish Jack had written more songs, really, is what it boils down to. So there was a brief period of time where I sort of went a little off the White Stripes. I just didn't really enjoy the album that much. And I was just kind of bummed out by it. And it was also, at the same time, it was also weird to now see them in the world of Blink-182 and all the other stuff that was happening at the time in modern rock. It was kind of like, I don't know, how do these guys fit in? Because, I mean, that was the thing, is I remember when MTV started to try to push the garage rock bands, or the retro futuristic bands, or whatever it was. I remember they had a highlight reel, and it was all super slick, and the Strokes and everybody had their kind of perfect the song and the image and everything lined up perfectly, so you could boil it down right away. And I remember they weren't able to do that with the White Stripes, because the White Stripes didn't really operate that way. So I remember they had to take footage from the Hotel Yorba video and match it to the music of Fell in Love with a Girl. It was and I just never really thought that they sort of fit in that world. And the other thing is, at the time, I was coming from indie punk rock world. The White Stripes just did a few things, and this is really, in retrospect, there's all sorts of holes with this logic, so I'm not trying to make absolute statements here. But I remember thinking Nirvana wouldn't have done that. Or I just remember they did a show that was a free show that was sponsored by Snapple, and they were just, or Volkswagen or something. It was, or maybe both. And I just remember that's a little odd. And there were just these sort of odd things that were happening with the White Stripes. But I eventually sort of came round back to them. because I felt like I was being a little too ridiculous and a little too pearl clutching, and the music was still good, right? By the time I was off them for a few months, and then I sort of came back around to them because I was like, what is my problem with this? Like, I'm being the kind of person I would criticize or in some cases make fun of, right? In November of 2003, I went to go see the White Stripes play at the Rave / Eagles Ballroom. I think that's what it was called, or what it is called in Milwaukee. And it was pretty weird because, like, drove up, I want to say on a work night, and it's something I would never do now. Like, we drove up to Milwaukee, saw this show, and then just turned right back around and drove home, which is kind of weird. And then I want to say, I didn't look up what day of the week the show was on, but I think I just went to work the next day as if nothing had happened, which like I said, I just would, it was such a weird thing to do. But that was a really strange show because, so I had only seen the White Stripes play incandescent, like, perfect shows. Like, they were basically always perfect, and they pretty much always totally knocked me out. And the show was a strange one. Things were strange from the beginning. I remember I had a pen in my coat. I had this, like, nice fountain pen, and this gangly galoot security guy decided that during a pat down that constituted a weapon and confiscated it. And I was like, it's a pen. Like, I was like, what the hell? Because I kept this pen on me for writing, and I liked having it. And I'll never forget, I protested, and I was like, but that's my pen. Like, why are you confiscating a pen? I was like, that's my pen. And the guy just, while maintaining eye contact, just, like, threw it behind him into the garbage can, and just said something like, yeah, not no more, that's not. And I just remember, like, looking at, and saying, I think I said, you're an asshole. And I just walked past. He did not respond to that. But the show was really weird. They did not perform badly, but there was a weird atmosphere, and the band felt very remote. It felt like they were playing, well, it felt like I was watching them on TV or something. It didn't seem like they were somehow in the same room. It was also, I remember, extremely dark. That was the other thing that was very weird about it, was I felt like they just played with, like, one light on them. It was like one of the darkest shows that I've ever been to. And apparently, around that time and then into 2004, I was not the only person to notice that and to notice a change in the mood. I want to say Jack was even dressed in all black that night. When I was doing my research for this, I found a review from April of 2004 from Uncut Magazine, where the writer Nick Hasted noted Jack's darkly manic, near hysterical mood. And I feel like, I don't know, it was almost as if something, like, had happened to Jack, or that he was, like, somehow grappling with something. It was very odd. And then, at the very end of 2004, we shall once again reach into the White Stripes box of mystery. And this came out, Under Blackpool Lights, a fully produced, full concert film recorded in Blackpool. It was recorded in January of 2004. I think it came out in November or December of 2004. And I was, I was pretty solidly back into White Stripes world at this point, but this was an absolutely outstanding document and a crowning achievement. I understand that this has become, unfortunately, something of an obscurity over the years. I really cannot recommend this enough. This is one of the greatest concert films ever made. I purposely left it out of, I think I left it out of my great concert film because I wanted to make it like the number one of, like, when I do 10 more or 20 more or whatever great concert films. This is about as good as it gets. This is basically a perfect show. And again, transcendentally amazing. Absolutely perfect. Again, incandescent. So, as if I wasn't already firmly back with the White Stripes, this absolutely knocked me out. If there's a way that you can track this down, absolutely do yourself a favor. This should not become lost media. This is elegant, perfect, but also raw and stomping stuff. I cannot say enough good things about this. But throughout 2004, things were changing and shifting in White Stripes' world. For one thing, the British press, who had adored them and who had just fawned over them, even the British press were starting to be kind of pissy about them. Hence some middling reviews for Under Blackpool Lights, which is inexplicable. I have no idea how you could watch that and come away with anything other than like total fervor and like adoration for this band and their music. But for everything that was positive, so Jack was in the movie Cold Mountain and did some stuff for the soundtrack. He also, of course, to great fanfare, produced Loretta Lynn's Van Leer Rose album, which all the critics went very goo goo gaga over. And so those are the positives, but there were a lot of negatives happening. So for instance, Jack was sued by Jim Diamond, claiming that, you know, the money wasn't right from the first two albums. Part of the problem with that, of course, is they didn't record Distill at Jim Diamond's studio. They recorded it at Jack's house. So a little absurd. And like he wanted, like, I forget what the terms of it were, but he wanted like co-ownership of the master tapes, and it was very weird. Then of course you had the snobbishness from indie world, garage rock world, punk world, partially in the person of Billy Childish, who I don't think Billy Childish's pissy comments about Jack White reflected very well upon him. I'll just delicately, diplomatically say that. And then Long Gone John, who ran Sympathy for the Record Industry, started. I forget now what it was, but I think there were some pretty weird comments coming from his direction as well, all of which is really unfortunate. Especially because Sympathy for the Record Industry is like the great unsung record label, like in indie world. I mean, they have done so much unbelievable work, absolutely incredible work. So that's sad. But there was the public dating that Jack White did with Renee Zellweger, and that apparently did not end well. I remember a coworker calling me over to her computer saying, oh, that band, you like that guy, here he is. You know, there were also like weird things, like the rumor that went around that Jack White was dating Winona Ryder, which was a rite of passage for any emerging alt-rock superstar. Just odd, dumb stuff. And again, I just kept thinking, it sucks that Jack's sort of like in the middle of all of this crap. Like this stuff is like beneath him, you know. But then the other big thing was, of course, in 2004, Jack White, who had produced the first Von Bondi's album, Lack of Communication, an album I liked. I had gone to see them play, and the one guitar player was Jack's then, or was she already an ex-girlfriend, Marcy. And I really liked the Von Bondis. I liked that first album. And, you know, Jason, again, started saying some weird shit, and, you know, things got increasingly weird, and, you know, Jack beat him up and had to go to anger management classes. What's interesting is the degree to which people in White Stripes' world defend Jack, and that effectively, I've read more than one person effectively say that Jason Stolzheimer had it coming. So I make of that what you will. Jack was writing songs, though, all throughout 2004, and was actually doing the writing of what would eventually become Get Behind Me, Satan. The album was recorded in the early part of 2005, and then was released in the middle of the year. So that was all happening in the first half of the year. Now, what I will say right now is, I talked about how weird it is that their most famous album, kind of like Neil Young's Harvest, is a transitional album, and I would argue, not their greatest work. It begs the question then, what is their greatest work? Because the White Stripes pose an enigma, whereas you can make a comparison to Harvest from Elephant. I don't know that I have been able to come up with a comparison here. Now, on one hand, you could say that you could make the case that the first album's their best album. I don't know that I'm fully on board with that one. You can make the case that Distill is the best album. Interesting. Interesting. But logically, this would be their best album on the one hand. And it's the most, I suppose, representative of what the White Stripes sound like and what you would think that the White Stripes sound like. To me, Elephant is, well, just a not as good version of this, effectively, as Jack is trying out new things and expanding his artistry and creativity and conceptual reach. There are advancements being made. Again, kind of like Beatles for Sale or Help. There are things cooking that are interesting that will bear fruit later. But it in and of itself, you know, to me, it feels like it's a dip in quality. And that leads me to this. I believe that Get Behind Me, Satan is the White Stripes' greatest work. I think it's their deepest and most artistic, creative work. I think it's the best collection of songs that Jack White ever wrote. It is also the least representative White Stripes album. And I cannot, so whereas I can come up with a comparison to Harvest for Elephant, I cannot come up with a comparison. I just can't. I cannot think of any other band, and I've been trying for a couple of weeks now, where what I consider to be the greatest and most significant album is the one that is the least like them. I remember an older guy who was like a guy who'd like been through the 60s and 70s who I worked with and who liked the White Stripes and loved Elephant. Like, he was like, Ball and Biscuit was like, he was thrilled that there was a band that was doing a blues jam like that on record, you know, and that was popular, having like hit records. And I remember he bought this and he was like, yeah, I don't like it. It doesn't even sound like them. And it would be sort of like if Between the Buttons was the greatest Stones album or something. And I feel like this is the 21st century Between the Buttons, except again, in some alternate reality where Between the Buttons is somehow greater than Beggar's Banquet or Let It Bleed or Exile on Main Street or Sticky Fingers, right? Or Some Girls, for that matter. Which I don't think that it is. But this is. And so it's very weird to me that their most popular album is the kind of overall the least interesting one for me. And the greatest album is by far the least characteristic. Now, I will say, if I'm totally going to be very Rich Talks Records about it, we shall again consult the White Stripes Box of Mystery. What treasures does it hold? And it holds this. This is the Peel Sessions. I have a few versions of this one. And I think this came out as a vault package at some point along the line. But I don't have that. There were many years where I was not signed up for it, which I'll probably mention later. But this is yet another fan-made. And this is the two different Peel sessions that they did, July 25th of 2001 and August 11th of 2001. And honestly, if I was really going to be that guy about it, this is the defining White Stripes statement. This is the single greatest thing that the White Stripes ever did, because this is the closest approximation that you're ever really going to get, and it has the sonic fidelity, because it's a Peel session, of just what they were like live on stage and how they just fucking shot you out of a fucking cannon out into space from the first number and then never let up, because there was really, other than the Stooges, and I saw the Stooges 2 times. I saw the Ron Ashton Stooges and I saw the James Williamson Stooges. That's it as far as what I can compare it to in terms of absolutely incendiary, but then also just the ride that they took you on, and they kept you in the grips. They kept you at complete captivating attention the entire time that they were on stage, you know. Now, we are going to jump ahead a little bit because, like I said, album talk will be in the next video, and I will talk about all the different singles and all the different material that came out, and there's a lot of it. I initially was thinking that this might be like a 3 or 4 hour video, and my wife, God bless her, suggested maybe make it a couple different videos. She's like, you've done that before. Remember the Rolling Stones? And I was like, dear, when you're right, you are so right. You are very right. So anyway, but what I am going to talk about is some live stuff. Now, the Under Amazonian Lights vault package I don't have. That came out in 2015. If you've watched my other videos, 2015 was smack dab in the, say it with me, the divorce years, dun dun dun, you know the drill. And I need to have like an audio cue. I just start playing of that. I need to work on that. Money was tight, and I didn't know if I was even going to be able to hold on to my record collection. I didn't even know where I was going to be living at that point. And money was tight. Lawyers are expensive, and I didn't know what kind of space I was going to have. I was like, I don't really think I could afford public storage. Yeah, I couldn't be spending money on vault packages at that time. So but I will be still that notwithstanding, I will be talking about the Under Amazonian Lights extensively in a moment, because it is box of mystery. Because it is the second part in something of an unofficial trilogy with this, the Under Great White Northern Lights set, which is a little bit splits the difference between a documentary and a concert film. It's the great missing link in something of an unofficial trilogy. And one more time into the box of mystery. The White Stripes, when touring for Get Behind Me, Satan, started things off. Actually, the list of tour dates I had looked at, I don't know that it did start off. I think they played some shows in Mexico, and I forget where else. But they kind of really, really kicked it off in South America. And I always wondered if Jack White, being the Orson Welles enthusiast and obsessive, we both are, and it was something I've always had in common with him. I always wondered if it was inspired by this, the great abandoned project. Orson unfortunately had a number of abandoned projects, but I always wondered if Jack had been watching It's All True, and that was where the business about going to South America came from. And I will just take a moment here and say, if you've never seen this, watch it. The concept of Orson Welles, as experimentalist documentarian is astonishing and truly, truly something absolutely magical to behold. So if you've never seen It's All True, go check it out, because it is totally amazing. The White Stripes in South America resulted in the film Under Amazonian Lights, and I saw the broadcast that was aired on MTV. I think it was one of the last things that I ever taped on VHS. I have it on VHS somewhere. There are two different versions of it that are out on the internet. Are on YouTube. One is slightly longer. It's the full broadcast, but the quality isn't quite as good. The video's from a while ago. And then the other is tightened up, like the intro is trimmed off and some of the context is lost. But it's on the wonderful, wonderful Scottish TV channel, and that was just taken straight from M2. Remember M2? Does that even still exist? I have absolutely no idea. But that as a concert film, so it's about 42 minutes, 43 minutes. That is pretty extraordinary. It's about as good as it gets. The White Stripes staging at this time, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail, was absolutely extraordinary. This was really like the full flower of them as a stage act. They were just absolutely unbelievable. But the full concert was closer to, or a little bit more than an hour. So on the vault release, which I don't have, there is the audio of the full performance. Now, there's also a 45 that I'll talk about in the next video which has some studio stuff on it. But the time shall come for that. And that time is not today. But The full audio, there's a pretty decent vinyl rip. I'll include a link to that. And the show is incredible if all you're doing is listening to it. It's amazing, and you can't go wrong. I really cannot overstate. And that's the other thing I will just say. The White Stripes in 2005 are very, very well documented, and there's a ton of shows out there. They did an amazing show at Glastonbury, but I think, Glastonbury, as much as I think they headlined it, it's still Glastonbury, or as they say in the UK, Glasto. It's Glastonbury, so it's not, you know what I mean? So it's not fully their context, but this is. And I really hope that this gets some sort of wider release or becomes more available, because as the film of it, as a piece of staging, as a piece of concert film, it is absolutely, absolutely glorious. And you get to really see the full glory of the White Stripes on stage at this time. This might even, in fact, perhaps be their peak, simply because you would think that 2000, 2001, 2002 would be their peak as a live act, because I'm telling you, they blew them away every night, and I was there for plenty of it, and Jesus Christ, they were fucking great. And they were great every time. I really cannot overestimate just how awesome they were constantly. But they had more songs to draw from. And Jack was so adept. They, of course, never worked with a set list. And Jack could call out the numbers and would abandon numbers halfway through. And just simply by virtue of the fact that they had more songs, a deeper well of songs to pull from, means that they were sort of just increasing as a live act in terms of their the net cumulative of their greatness and the real core of their power. So. But the Under Amazonian Lights, so it was filmed at Teatro Amazonas, and it was on June 1st of 2005. June 1st wound up being a pretty, and it was a capacity of 600 people. So it wound up being a pretty significant date in the life of Jack White, because earlier that day he got married to Karen Elston, who he had met on the set of the Blue Orchid music video. It was Meg White, who Jack's big sister, if you don't know, who encouraged him to marry her. She apparently called it and just saw it right away that they were clearly going to get married. So when the White Stripes landed at the Manaus airport, it was apparently sort of something akin to Beatlemania. They were the first rock and roll band to ever play at the Teatro Amazonas, and it was built brick by brick, shipped down from Europe by robber barons. It has a whole fascinating backstory. And the culture secretary, Roberto Brasso, was there. It was a major event. He brought his daughters. Like I said, that morning, Jack White got married, and but where they got married was by a shaman, a local shaman, and it was at the confluence of two rivers. See, we're bringing it all together, where the Ponta Negra and the Salamones merge. And into the Amazon. So the combining of the three. And then later, after they got married out on the Amazon, on this, out on the river, the marriage was blessed by a Catholic priest, because weirdly, the White Stripes, Jack was considering going to seminary. Weirdly, the White Stripes are perhaps the single most Catholic rock and roll band that has ever been. The White Stripes stage design is an absolute triumph at this point. They are lit primarily by opera footlights. They look great. I'll be talking about that shortly. And then the layout of all the instruments. So there was a marimba, there was a piano. I remember it was a big deal. There was a show. I forget where the show was, but I remember it was like in 2001, where the White Stripes Jack actually had a keyboard on stage, and I remember it was like this big deal, like, because they were such a small little band and playing for such tiny little crowds. I mean, first time I ever saw them, it was like 40 or 60 whatever people, and the idea that there was this huge layout of instruments and 2 timpanis for Meg, like, it was theatrical, but also, well, a little weird, and it's just fascinating, and the dedication to the color scheme, and the dedication, just the rigid adherence to the aesthetics of the group. The White Stripes, everything about it, they built a universe and then invited you into it, and within that universe, you could focus on the limitations, but Jack creatively was weirdly unlimited, because nearly every single thing he tried, no matter how far-flung, really worked and was really awesome and cool and interesting. The show, and I mean, again, getting into the specifics of the show, I mean, Jack is forever, like, rearranging the songs on stage. He's constantly finding new spaces in the songs. There's constant reinvention happening, and it feels a little ridiculous to get into the moments of, like, the minutia of that. In the same way that, like, one of the reasons I've struggled and, like, I haven't done any Van Halen videos is because how many times would I say, oh, in this one part of the song, Eddie does something really amazing. It would be like saying that 80 times a song. And I still haven't quite worked out how I want to talk about Van Halen, right? So talking about the White Stripes live is a similar thing. And you're just talking about kind of degrees of greatness, degrees of awesomeness. And they're very human and very honest. And there are some things that just don't work. And there are some songs that kind of start to meander. And then Jack cuts it off and they blast off into something else. The liveness and the humanity and the realness of it was phenomenal, and that you really could never tell, and I mean, I saw it from very up close, you really could never tell what was happening where they didn't know what was going to happen next, and what was part of the show. And at some point, all of it becomes, those two things split out at some point, right? So on one hand, all of it's part of the show, and on the other hand, all of it's real. Or the show is the sort of the border of that they're drawing with the color scheme and the everything in threes and blah 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 blah. And then anything can happen within that space. It's just a complete free-for-all then. And there's, again, within the limitations, they really were totally unlimited. But there are 2 moments that I'll focus on from Under Amazonian Lights, which is, again, an exceptional piece of work and a vital component of this whole period of the White Stripes, and Get Behind Me, Satan. It's the direct extension of that. And that is, Jack had been married earlier that morning, and he plays the 1920s ballad, Apple Blossom Time. He interrupts, I think it's The Same Boy You've Always Known. Or, no, it's I Don't Know What to Do With Myself. And he interrupts it and goes off and plays the song. And he sings it. He sings it to Karen. It is amazing. The other thing is the crowd is so rabid, though they do wait for permission to be told to stand up, which a roadie comes over and says to Jack, they're waiting for permission to stand up, which I think is interesting. But the demand for the show was so great that they had erected these huge screens outside the venue, and there were just seemingly thousands, but apparently, of people watching the show just from outside. So at one point towards the end of the show, Jack says, we're going to try something, and we're going to go out there. And the response, and Jack sort of perches himself along the, I don't even know what you would call it. It's not a parapet, but whatever it is. But he's like looking down at everybody. He's trying to get them to play. And Meg has a pair of bongos, and he tries to play We're Going to Be Friends. And like they barely get through the song because people are just like yelling, like they're just so manic and they're so excited that the White Stripes just came out just to see them. It is a truly, truly beautiful moment. It is a moment that, like, I don't know, I got sort of weirdly choked up when I first saw it. And even watching it again for the purposes of making this video, there was just something about it that was just really special. The White Stripes, at their best, were the ultimate antidote to the absurdity, the over-exaggeration of 90s sort of irony and too cool for school. The White Stripes dared to be sometimes perhaps even painfully earnest, and that is just a really, again, the humanity of it. It is just a truly, truly beautiful, beautiful human moment, and it's totally worth watching. I really can't recommend it enough. On this package, on the DVD, there is some great live stuff, including a moment, I think it's from Guatemala, where Jack says, I tore a page out of the book of Cool, and it's a boring book. And I love that. That's a very Jack White 2005 sentiment. The Book of Cool is a boring book. It is. I was there. It's extremely fucking boring. It's still very boring for the people who still live with those things. There's also a wealth of fascinating rehearsal footage where Jack and Meg are just running through songs, and it is so natural and free-flowing. It's really, really remarkable. None of that stuff appears to be out on YouTube. I think it might only be housed here, but it is absolutely amazing. The other live footage from this tour, though, is pretty much equal of Under Amazonian Lights. It's just that that's a really special night and a really particularly focused and concentrated night. But the other stuff is, again, I mean, they're just uniformly excellent. So, but from there, the White Stripes toured America, of course, and on a very special night, we shall yet again go to the White Stripes box of mystery. Whatever shall we find? What wonders lay inside? Oh, make it a good one. No, on August 29th, 30th, and 31st, the White Stripes performed at the Auditorium Theater. I went looking, and I found these were the only tickets I found. But these are from those shows. So there you go. And there you go. And there you go. So we went and saw them all 3 nights. They were minor set list variations all 3 nights. They were amazing all 3 nights. I don't know that one night was better than the other. Again, the staging. Jack's very bizarre bolero, matador, Prince in the early 90s, conquistador outfits. I don't know. Those were fascinating outfits. I don't fully understand what the vibe was, but Zorro, swashbuckling, fascinating, but amazing. And again, the opera footlights, they looked so fucking good on stage, the way that they were lit. It was so dramatic. And then that backdrop, again, similar to this, that backdrop, the new songs, they were absolutely, absolutely phenomenal, all 3 nights. I remember their exit music was side 2 of Exile on Main Street. So I remember hearing, I want to say, Sweet Virginia, and maybe Lovin' Cup, and I'm now forgetting what the other song was. But their exit music, I don't remember if there was entrance music, but I remember the exit music was side 2 of Exile on Main Street. And the first night in Chicago, it turns out, is up on YouTube. And throw the photo up, Rich. I'm gonna put a circle where I was about, because we got pretty damn good tickets for these shows. I don't know how we pulled that off, but we did. But yeah, they were incredible. But the funniest thing was, and I couldn't remember which night it was, but Jack would talk to the crowd a fair amount. And on this particular night, I don't really think he'd said anything yet. And at one point, he picked up, And there was a really dark, again, manic energy to the show. And Jack picks up this ventriloquist puppet, and it was really deranged looking, and the music was so dark and weird and intense that night. And there's all this guitar feedback going, and Jack puts the puppet in front of his face and starts manipulating the mouth, this ventriloquist puppet, which was really spooky and like very like super like freaky looking. And he just, this high-pitched voice, "Hi, my name is Jack White." And it was, I remember thinking, this is like, they have now, well, like with the bigger budget and the bigger venues, they have now crossed the line. This is like, they are like some sort of like avant-garde fucking like experimentalist theater troupe as much as they are a rock and roll band. Like, this is fucking weird. I don't know where these guys are heading. But there is like a really weird energy here. And I loved it. It was fantastic. So when it turns out that the show that's on YouTube, which obviously I will be definitely fucking linking to, I want to say that moment happens maybe like 15 or 20 minutes in. It was on that first night. Like, it's like you hear him go, "Hi, man," and I couldn't, it was so weird after, you know, just a little over 2 decades, this visual that I have had in my head I mean, the show is audio only, but to hear it was very jarring because it has only ever existed in my mind since it happened. But absolutely phenomenal. From there, later on in the year, I think they eventually went back to Europe, but there are still, they played like a K-Rock show. That show is really good. But then they did Live from the Basement, or the Basement Sessions Room, or the Basement Session. I don't know what the show was called. That's up on their official channel. That's about 20 minutes. That is also extraordinary. The only difference is you don't have all of the staging. So you don't get like the full sense of what it was like visually to watch them, and the visual component was just so important. Is it really, they were really stunning. I will say, Meg's outfit, the deep red with the 1940s like scarf, or handkerchief tied in a bow around her neck, like the polka dot, like Meg, like looks about as good as a human being could ever look. She is like, she really is. And I mean, I've always thought this about Meg. Meg is like the ultimate rock and roll woman. With all due respect to Marianne Faithfull and Tina Turner and everybody else, there are lots of great rock and roll women. Joan Jett, I mean, you can go down the list. But to me, Meg is somehow, I don't know, I just sort of feel like she somehow loves it the most. I always got that vibe from her. Meg is just, I in the next video, when I talk about the album, I will be rhapsodizing quite a lot about Meg. I used to joke back then in the 2000s and say that she was my favorite member of the band. Not as a joke, like making fun, but just because people were so focused on Jack, that I was like, Meg is one half of what you're hearing. I mean, Meg is pretty extraordinary. Let's not screw that up, you know. The unfortunate thing, though, was that was the last time that I ever saw the White Stripes, because they didn't tour for what would eventually be, you know, that was their final album, Icky Thump. The tour was shuttered by the time it was going to come anywhere near me. I know they played some shows, but so weirdly, August 31st, 2005 was the last time I ever saw the White Stripes. This incredible 5-year run of seeing these shows that were just absolutely, completely, and totally, utterly mind-bending. And helped give me a sense of direction when one was needed. And just again, the strict sense of aesthetics, Jack being the ultimate rock and roll aesthete, and the taste level, and the fact that he was that real, but that camp, but that earnest. It's a strange combination. It's a strange thing to combine, like mid-60s Bob Dylan, late 40s Orson Welles, you know, David Bowie, you know, early 70s David Bowie. Like, Jack connected a lot of dots that were just and somehow have the ferocity and power of, you know, Nirvana in 1990 or 1991, 1992. It's weird. It's a strange combination, and then obviously Iggy's in there somewhere, and yeah, they were just. It's hard to believe that that was the last time that I ever saw them. I certainly, at the time, never would have thought that. I would have thought that I was going to be seeing them for years and years. Also later on in the year, and we'll be touching upon this, Jack supposedly changed his name, nobody remembers this, to 3 Quid. He announced that in England somewhere around November of that year. So briefly, for a while, he was apparently to be known as 3 Quid. So, which I feel is part of the Jack White sort of loses his mind slightly at this time, but to interesting and ever kind of sort of fascinating artistic effect. So yeah, so I think that that's kind of enough for this video. This sort of covers kind of roughly 1/2 of what I wanted to talk about with the White Stripes, and then the next video we'll get more just straight ahead. There'll be a little bit of setup and context, but we'll mostly just get straight ahead into album talk, and then, like I said, we'll run through some of the singles and some of the B-sides, some of the outtakes, and then I'll go a little bit more into detail on some of the vault package things, but that's next time. So I guess this will be a 2-parter. We finally discovered it together. Yes, isn't that wonderful? So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I'm excited to go on and do the next one. I'll do that in a few weeks. And otherwise, like I said, I hope that you've enjoyed this. And please, like and comment and subscribe and all of the other different YouTube things. And I will see you soon enough with the next part. And what will I be wearing? What shall the fit check look like then? You'll just have to wait to find out. So anyway, yeah, that about wraps things up here. Until next time, everybody, I'll see you all in the next exciting video. So yeah, until next time,